Corpse Empress, Chapter 1. My father struggled immensely to open the lid of the bright red coffin. Through the dense layer of dust, a Qing dynasty noblewoman lay in peaceful repose. She was wrapped in a shroud with circular patterns, adorned with a necklace of imperial pearls, a pearl in her mouth, and her cheeks were a rosy hue. Her body was untouched by decay, her face unscathed by rot. "This is indeed the old Buddha," my father exclaimed, stunned, for he was somewhat knowledgeable in feng shui and the mystical arts. People say the eastern tomb of the Empress Dowager was blown up by Commander Sun's artillery. Humph, the treasures buried with her were indeed looted, but your great-grandfather, who served in the 6th Corps, said that when they finally got inside the tomb, there was no one in the coffin. The grave robbers were so blatant that even the senior officials in the capital were aware of it. They immediately moved the Empress Dowager's coffin in the dead of night. If it weren't for the frequent earthquakes in June, I would never have known. Beneath the pigsty where we had lived for many years lay an ancient tomb. My father, with an excited gleam in eyes, pushed me forward. "Ergo, quickly take the night pearl from the Empress Dowager's mouth. But if you touch a female corpse, the yin energy will invade your body, potentially costing you your soul." Seeing my hesitation, my older brother, irritated, slapped me hard. "Hurry up and do it. I have college entrance exams soon. I can't touch anything unlucky." Although we were twins, my brother was born healthy and whole. I, on the other hand, was born missing 2 fingers on my right hand and with a limp, only fit to live in the pigsty like a mangy dog. Beaten to the point of coughing up blood, I mustered the little strength I had left to step forward and grasp the Empress Dowager's jaw. Her face, covered in a layer of soot, looked youthful from a distance. But touching it, I could feel the wrinkles beneath, like dead tree bark, cold as snake scales. My heart pounded like a drum. In my panic, I didn't notice my blood dripping from my mouth onto her lips. Perhaps due to the distant, flickering candlelight, I felt as though her stained lips moved slightly. I dared not breathe too hard, being so close. I could smell the foul stench from the Empress Dowager's black hair. "What are you dilly-dallying for? Get it out already!" Under my brother's constant urging, I pried her mouth open with all my might. My heart skipped a beat. Using the 3 fingers on my hand, missing 2, I fumbled into her mouth. Her tongue, limp like a stretched rubber band, touched my palm. The cold, wet sensation made my skin crawl. Nausea surged from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. At that very moment, the pearl slipped down her throat, getting stuck. In the tomb, there was no wind. The air felt sticky. I was drenched in sweat, my 3 fingers poking around inside, searching for the pearl. Finally, I retrieved the pearl. The next day, for the first time, my father allowed me to sit at the dining table. He even asked me gently, "Ergo, you're almost 18. It's time you got married." My heart raced, filled with a sense of foreboding. "I've checked your birth date. It matches perfectly with the Empress Dowager's. Tomorrow, we'll have a grand wedding." I was dumbfounded, wondering who I was supposed to marry. That ancient corpse? My father, irritated, stubbed out his cigarette and said, "You know nothing. A ghost bride will bring prosperity to our family. The Empress Dowager is the most noble woman. Fire and wood together bring immense luck and unparalleled fortune." Ghost bride prosperity, marrying a ghost to bring prosperity to the family. Once this ghost wedding is done, we'll be part of the royal lineage. I'll have the Empress Dowager bless your brother for his exams, making him extraordinary. I was speechless, thinking that since the Qing dynasty's fall, hundreds of years had passed. Could a century-old ghost really bless modern people? My father, as head of the family, had absolute authority. No one could defy him. I looked to my mother for help. But if the villagers find out, won't they mock DeLong? How will he find a wife? She truly was a considerate mother, thinking so far ahead. My brother sneered, "Don't worry, Mom. I built a high wall around the pigsty last night. No one will know. Ergo can't get a wife anyway. This is a blessing for him." My mother beamed with pride, praising my brother. Their display of familial affection made my heart grow cold. In my mother's eyes, I was just a burden. She swiftly and easily discarded any trouble. That's the smart survival instinct of the lower classes. Even my grandfather, who had lived his life for the family, was abandoned in a remote mountain when his legs failed, sent there on a freezing winter day. Grandfather was the only one who treated me kindly. When I tried to stop them, my father kicked me, breaking a rib. He cursed as he kicked. "You disgraceful thing. What sin did I commit to deserve a cripple like you? 'Cause more trouble and I'll throw you away too." That night, dressed in a tattered groom's outfit, I was taken to the tomb by my family. My father burned a red talisman with our birth dates, dragging me inside, tied up. "You must stay with the Empress Dowager until the rooster crows at dawn for the ritual to be complete." My brother stood by, grinning maliciously. "You're in luck, becoming the Empress Dowager's husband." I laughed bitterly, recalling my parents' whispers before we left home. The Empress Dowager's destiny is noble, but her yin energy is strong, harmful to her spouse and children. Ergao will face misfortune, but that's his fate, born crippled. My mother sighed. Sacrificing for the family is his fortune. The rope was thick and rough. I couldn't break free, the corpse's shoulder pressed against me. My eyes caught sight of a yellowish insect slowly crawling out from her ear. I didn't know how much time had passed when the candles flickered and went out. But there was no wind in the tomb. In the darkness, I felt an unprecedented terror. Because something wet and slimy was touching my clothes, like a soft, cold hand groping my chest, squeezing continuously. Cold sweat drenched me. I gasped in fear. My head spun, nearly suffocating. But the moment it touched the pendant near my heart, the hand recoiled as if burned. That's when I woke up. Looking down, I nearly lost my soul. A ghostly hand with long claws. The pendant was a bagua mirror, my grandfather's heirloom. When he was abandoned, I secretly brought him food every day. Knowing his time was short, he gave it to me. "Keep this, it will protect you. Your great-grandfather used to explore tombs with Commander's son. This mirror wards off evil. Never take it off, no matter what." I fainted until morning, awakened by screams. My mother was crying my brother's name. Inside, he lay stiff like a log. His upper body was bare, his chest skin completely peeled off. From afar, it looked like a red vest groom's outfit. My father, panicked, dragged me out of the tomb, beating me. "Why was Dalong with the Empress Dowager last night? What did you do?" I quickly realized. It was the bagua mirror's power. Our birth dates were almost identical. If it couldn't harm me, it would go for him. But I dared not tell the truth, only shielding my head, pleading. "Dad, you know I didn't leave the tomb. We need to save him." My father, a dabbler, had only ever arranged ghost marriages, never encountering such a thing. Regaining composure, he sought a high priest. The priest, upon seeing the scene, rebuked my father. "Wang, what foolishness is this?" My father, terrified, I followed the ancient books for a ghost marriage. Ordinary marriages require betrothal gifts. How dare you marry the Empress Dowager without any gifts? Even monkeys know better. To marry the Empress Dowager properly, send phoenix invitations, offer betrothal gifts, celebrate with drums and banquets, invite friends and family. Every detail must be perfect. Otherwise, your family will be the Empress Dowager's dowry. This left my father stunned. In previous ghost marriages in the village, only paper figures were used, no strict rituals. Seeing my brother's miserable state, my mother scolded. So old and a widow, yet even as a ghost she's so arrogant. My brother was hospitalized, barely surviving. Returning home, he was covered in boils, some as big as walnuts, oozing pus. Every day he lay in bed cursing, kicking our mother away when she tried to console him. The priest advised my father to return the night pearl. "It's not too late," my father argued. My grandfather told stories of a family who found a noble tomb during the Republic era. They performed a ghost marriage, entered the royal lineage, and were blessed. They thrived for generations, as long as they kept the spirits honored. The Wangs want to change their destiny. Taking some risks is worth it. No wonder, claiming it was for my brother's success was a lie. It was for his own gain. Seeing my father unmoved, the priest listed a long checklist for the wedding. 16 pounds of gold paper, 18 maidservant figures, 8 pounds of silver paper, a phoenix crown, 10 sets of wooden furniture. So much, this will cost a fortune. My father's face turned grim. A real bride wouldn't cost this much. The priest sneered. "Where will the 100 ghosts sit without wooden furniture? If you won't pay, figure it out yourself." My father reluctantly agreed to prepare everything. The guests were ghosts, not real people. As I tried to sneak away, the priest grabbed my collar. "Ergo, tonight you'll invite the spirits to the wedding." I refused, but my father beat me with his belt. "You're the groom, you invite the guests." I lowered my head, hiding the hatred in my eyes. Night fell, the graveyard was eerily quiet, tombstones everywhere. I knelt before an old grave, a ghostly flag planted on it. In the faint light, the names were unreadable. I kowtowed randomly. Before leaving, the priest warned, "Inviting ghosts has rules. Remember these 3, or you'll invite trouble. First, after burning the invitation, bow twice. You're not related to the deceased, don't bow a 3rd time. Second, return before dawn. Third, light a half-burnt incense before each grave, extinguish it halfway, or the ghosts won't find their way back." After lighting the incense, nothing happened for a long time, only the wind and my breath. Suddenly, something stirred beneath the grave. Cold sweat drenched my back, thinking it was my imagination, the eerie wind rustling the weeds. Gathering courage, I pressed my ear to the grave. Faint, muffled sounds. I could clearly hear it, small knocking sounds from within the coffin. I collapsed in fear, legs too weak to stand. The priest said this meant success. The knocking grew louder and faster. Mixed with the wind were faint cries. A chill ran down my spine. Without delay, I stammered, "On the 7th day of the 7th month, Wang Ergo and Yehinara make a vow, inviting you to join our celebration." Chapter 2. I kept kneeling and bowing before hundreds of graves. Only when the sky started to show a streak of white did I hurriedly run home. Exhausted, my forehead covered in blood, I couldn't even stop the bleeding. Carefully, I asked my mother for some ointment, but she got angry, pressed on my wound, and scolded me. "You're only slightly scratched, and you dare ask for ointment? Look at how pitiful your brother is now. Why couldn't it be you who died instead?" The undisguised disgust and hatred in her eyes left me bewildered. We were both her sons, born from her womb, so why treat us so differently? Though my right hand was crippled, it didn't prevent me from working. I practiced writing with my left hand, and every perfect score my brother got on his assignments was all my doing. On the night of the wedding ceremony, the yard was filled with paper dolls. My father somehow managed to get 10 sets of real catalpa wood tables and chairs. The tables were laden with bowls and plates of dumplings and longevity noodles made from paper money. As the auspicious hour arrived, the temperature suddenly dropped, and my mother kept muttering, "Are ghosts really going to come to the feast? Isn't it still empty here?" As soon as she spoke, the paper dumplings on each table began to disappear one by one. The ground had been sprinkled with flour beforehand, and footprints of various sizes appeared on it. Everyone held their breath, not daring to breathe loudly. The Taoist priest shouted, inviting the bride. My father hurriedly urged me, "Nico, go fetch the bride." Gathering my courage, I approached the palanquin, knelt halfway, and carried out the Empress Dowager. Compared to when she was in the grave, her body had softened considerably, but the stench was much stronger. Her arms draped over my shoulders. The Empress Dowager was noble. There was no need to kneel, and my parents didn't dare accept it either. I carried her and slightly bowed towards my parents. The corpse's weight bore down on my back. As I bowed, I saw that in addition to my parents, there was an extra pair of legs in front of me. The toes were decayed, the flesh rotting. I recognized them at a glance. They were the tattered cloth shoes my grandfather wore before he died. Grandfather had been invited back too. I was so startled that I screamed. Under the moonlight, my grandfather's face was deathly pale, his mouth corners slowly curving up, grinning from ear to ear. The old Taoist priest panicked. "Hungry ghosts have come to the feast, not good." Grandfather advanced, gripping my father's neck, strangling him so hard that his clothes became disheveled, his chest heaving, his throat only able to make weak sounds asking for help. Only when the Taoist priest threw a talisman into the air could he pull us back into the house. My father barely escaped with his life, lying limp on the ground, unable to get up. I trembled with fear. "Master, why has my grandfather become like this?" The old Taoist priest was also stunned, cold sweat dripping down. "Is that your grandfather? 100 ghosts affected by his murderous aura are now causing trouble." Outside, my grandfather's piercing scream echoed as he lamented, "Son, I'm so hungry. How can you be so heartless, my son?" 100 ghosts wailed along, charging towards the house, making the wooden door creak continuously. My father knelt down, begging for help, and the Taoist priest asked seriously, Why has your father become a hungry ghost? You must tell me the truth so I can help you. Everything has its limits." My mother, thinking she was clever, said, "The old man was sick for a long time and couldn't eat, so he died. He was so malicious that he wouldn't even spare his own son." The Taoist priest sneered, "Ridiculous. Do you think anyone can become a hungry ghost? You're unfilial and wicked. You'll die terribly. If you survive until morning, it's because of your luck. Otherwise, I can't help you." As he left, my father panicked, losing all composure, not daring to step outside. "Nico, go outside and see. You're a boy, full of yang energy." Without any further reason, he kicked me outside. The cold wind, filled with eerie energy, slapped me in the face as if countless icy hands were tearing at me. My scalp tingled. A female ghost with half her body rotting appeared right in front of me. Her face was about to touch mine. I tightly closed my eyes, thinking I would be possessed by the evil spirit. But then, I heard the female ghost scream. Dazed, I opened my eyes wide. Under the moonlight, my grandfather grinned at me with his decaying face. "Nico, Grandpa is here to see you." I wasn't really afraid of my grandfather. As far as I could remember, my parents had abandoned me many times in abandoned factories, filthy pigsties, and deep forest areas. Each time, it was my grandfather who secretly brought me back. One late winter day when I was 10, my brother pushed me into an ice cave, and I got pneumonia. My parents said saving me was futile, but my grandfather didn't say a word, borrowing a tricycle from the neighbor and pedaling all day to take me to the county hospital. "Nico, we're almost there." When facing uphill, he used all his strength, his bent back arching like a shrimp. When facing headwinds, his breathing sounded like a broken gong. I couldn't bear to see him like that, weakly saying, "Grandpa, don't go to the hospital, it's too expensive." He replied, "We have money." From his pocket, he took out a very clean red cloth, inside which was the gold ring my grandmother left before she died. He sold the ring to pay for my medical bills. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days, and the doctor said if it had been delayed any longer, I wouldn't have survived. When my mother found out, she was furious, causing a huge commotion. "You had money but pretended to be poor, afraid we'd ask for a bit of it? Hiding it. Do you want to remarry or something? Worthless old man." From then on, they were increasingly dissatisfied with my grandfather. They even stopped letting him sit at the table for meals. My grandfather's cloudy eyes looked at me, and I waved to him. Then I went to my brother's room. He was lying on the couch, anxiously asking, "Nico, what's going on outside? Where are Mom and Dad? Help me." I wasn't in a hurry, sitting down by the bed saying nothing was wrong. "It's just that Grandpa has come to visit us." Yes, I invited Grandpa back. My brother's already distorted face turned even paler, looking terrifying. "Are you crazy? You said that during a ghost wedding. All the ghosts must be invited, or it wouldn't be proper. How could we not invite Grandpa?" That year, when my parents were working in the fields, I secretly stole steamed buns and hid them in the mountains. But my brother found out. He locked me in the warehouse, and when my parents knew, they praised him for it. Those days it snowed heavily, snowing continuously for 3 days and nights. The mountains were covered in snow, and when I found my grandfather, he had starved to death. His mouth was full of tree bark. His eyes rolled back, staring at the sky. He died where we had agreed to meet. Later, my brother showed me his new shoes. Mom said, "With one less mouth to feed, there's money for my new shoes." A new pair of shoes, what a great reason. Do you know that hungry ghosts are all those who died unjustly? Even the king of hell doesn't take them. I must give my grandfather a home. Under my brother's horrified and terrified gaze, I stuck half a burning incense stick on his headboard. "You're the eldest grandson. Now it's your turn to show filial piety to Grandpa." Chapter 3. It wasn't until the rooster crowed and daylight fully broke that my father dared to step out of his room. The previous night, he had killed the only rooster we had and smeared its blood all over himself. Rooster blood is said to ward off evil spirits. My mother also asked for some, but he kicked her aside. "What's the use of a woman using it? Get out of the way." Since that night, my mother had become a different person. She was terrified of the light and hid in a corner of the house, staring at my father and laughing eerily. Master Kung came to see me privately, his tone very delicate. "Nico, tell me why the 100 ghosts and spirits didn't return to their graves." I went to the graveyard, and the incense on the graves was all burned out. I squatted in front of the stove, stoking the fire, my face covered in ash, and smiled at him. "Master, I remembered every word you said. It must be that the strong winds blew it all out." Even though the ghost wedding had some mishaps, theoretically, it was still considered a success. My father took a piece of the Empress Dowager's bone and made it into a talisman, which he carried with him. In the days that followed, his luck in gambling improved so dramatically that it was astonishing. With the divine talisman, everything he bought won, and he became rich beyond measure. People at the gambling den came to ask for his secret, and he proudly said that his family had married a wealthy wife. Everyone admired him, but no one knew that the wealthy wife was actually a ghost bride. Seeing that we had money, my mother immediately proposed surgery for my brother to get a skin graft. I've consulted with the doctor. This poor small place can't perform the surgery. We have to go to a big city. If there's not enough money, Kao can sell a kidney. He's young, he can live with one kidney. They're siblings, helping each other is only natural. My eyelids twitched, and I didn't dare to speak. My father objected. Kao now has a wife. He can ensure our family's fortune. What good would it do to take along to the hospital? My brother now lay around all day, eating incessantly. He had grown so fat he looked like a rice barrel, even picking up rotten vegetables off the ground to eat, stuffing his face until his belly was swollen like a 5-month pregnant woman. Every day, he pointed at the air, shouting with a strange expression, "Father, Grandpa wants to come home for dinner." With ghosts in his heart, my brother's behavior made my father even more reluctant to see him. My mother wouldn't give up. She opened the coffin and invited Master Kung to help. "Your son Dai Long is possessed by a hungry ghost. A hungry ghost's mouth can consume endlessly. It will eat until the possessed person's belly bursts, and they..." My mother almost fainted. "It harms even its own flesh and blood. That old man is a heartless scoundrel struck by lightning." She wanted to curse more, but was stopped by the master's words. "You're committing a sin of the mouth. No one can save your son now. You should choose an auspicious day to rebury the old man's remains properly and then deal with it." Fortunately, my father had earned some money recently. Neighbors in the village saw him relocating the grave and thought he was filial, praising him for his devotion. Before the ritual, my brother escaped and ran into the pigsty, stuffing his face with leftover pig feed joyfully. The pigs were terrified of him, hiding far away. His eyes were filled with greed and madness, as if he hadn't eaten in 8 lifetimes. It took us a lot of effort to pull him out of there. The old master tied a rope around the beam and hung my brother upside down. Incense smoke filled the altar. My brother, weighing nearly 150 pounds, looked like a pig waiting to be slaughtered. As he swayed, the whole house seemed to shake. To exorcise a hungry ghost, kneel before the food god. Prepare a bowl of rice with chopsticks stuck in the middle. If the chopsticks fall in front of your house, it means the ghost is willing to leave. To send away a hungry ghost, use the chopsticks as a ladder. If it doesn't work, seeing the master fishing for more, I hurriedly asked, "Is there another way?" If it refuses to leave, there's only one last method. The old master patted my brother's fleshy shoulder. "A hungry ghost can't endure hunger. Starve it for 3 days and 3 nights. When it's too hungry to bear, it will leave." Finally, the chopsticks fell, but they didn't fall by the main door or the window. They fell towards my father. The master tried several more times, and each time the result was the same. It meant the next to be possessed would be him. My father broke out in a cold sweat and hurriedly decided to starve my brother. My mother, heartbroken, fought with him. "Ba Thien, are you going to starve your own son to death?" My father went mad, locked the room, and hid the key. He didn't forget to tell me, "Nico, no matter what your mother tells you to bring, don't bring it to him, not a drop of water." I replied, "The master said a small bowl of water is fine. If the ghost leaves but the person yees, what's the point?" After a while, my brother's desperate screams began to pierce the air. I brought water over, and he turned around in despair. His flesh-wrapped face contorted and distorted like a wild beast. The neighbors, annoyed by the noise, came over and knocked on the door. My father could only explain, "Dai Long, has been addicted to something bad. He's going through withdrawal. My mother stood guard at the door, repeatedly trying to sneak food to my brother, but was stopped by me. I sincerely advised, if he wants to live, he has to endure this. Your interference will only harm him. She put down the steamed buns in her hand and slapped me hard. He's your brother, how can you be so heartless? With a mouthful of blood, I licked it, unsure of my feelings. Numbness? Probably. I just said softly, yes, I'm heartless. I learned it from my parents. My mother cursed and left. But on the 6th day, my brother suddenly stopped screaming. He eat. Chapter 4. His belly split open, and blood and flesh splattered all over the floor. My mother, overwhelmed by the shock, fainted immediately. Because last night, out of pity for her son, she had secretly thrown a few buns inside. How could I have known things would turn out this way? I thought a few buns wouldn't hurt. It's already the 6th day, just one bite. My father scolded her for being ignorant, beat her up, and without caring about what happened next, moved out of the house. Recently, he had been making quite a bit of money. I noticed that the talisman on his chest was getting darker and darker. The black smoke seemed to burrow into his skin. I just watched silently and smiled. The first 7 days after my brother's death, the area outside the door suddenly became lively. It turned out that my father had returned. He brought back a new motorcycle, and riding on it was a beautiful widow. The widow's name was Mrs. Ton. She was just over 30, very charming, and she held onto my father's waist intimately. The most noticeable thing was that she was pregnant. My father seemed like a triumphant warrior returning home, and the villagers came over to gossip. Wasn't Mrs. Ton's late husband working in the mines with Vung Kui? He died in a mining accident half a year ago. They were good friends, and now they're together? Did you know Vung Kui's biological father was thrown into the deep mountains by him and died because of it? Is that true? You shouldn't say such things lightly. Why would I lie to you? I was chopping wood on the mountain. I saw it with my own eyes. Now his son is dead. It's karma. My mother ground her teeth in hatred, her face showing a crazed expression. She picked up a kitchen knife and pointed it straight at the two of them. Vung Kui, you deserve to die. When Dai Long died, you didn't come back even once. It turns out you were out messing around with this woman. My mother was weak, her steps unsteady. She was no match for my father. My father slapped her, knocking her down, then took Mrs. Ton by the hand and led her into the house. The woman didn't care about the gossip and stayed in our house. She had a voluptuous figure, standing in the yard washing her hair, her clothes soaked, her skin barely visible through the fabric. I passed by, glanced at her, and accidentally made eye contact. The woman looked at me and flirtatiously smiled. Nico, do you like what you see? We're family now. I'll let you look all you want in the future. My father had never bought my mother new clothes before, but now everything, food and clothes, were all brought for this widow. My mother was driven mad with jealousy. She tore up all of Mrs. Ton's clothes, calling her a whore. Mrs. Ton just laughed. Vung Kui cares for me, that's why. If you have the guts, go find him. Now, one of your sons is dead, the other is disabled, useless. What do you have to compare with me? She arrogantly pushed out her pregnant belly. The baby had already been confirmed by ultrasound to be a boy. That's why my father didn't care and brought her home. My mother sat on the ground crying, screaming my brother's name. That night, she put an entire bottle of rat poison in the dinner. Luckily, the smell was too strong. My father vomited it out immediately after taking a bite. He got furious, tied my mother up, and threw her in the storeroom. That night, I brought a bowl of porridge in. Her eyes were sunken, looking lifeless. I gently stirred the porridge, blew it cool, and brought it to her mouth. She swallowed it, but then spat it back onto my face. I wiped my face and put the bowl down. I've always wondered, both Dai Long and I are your sons. Why have you never treated me like a person? My mother coldly laughed. When you two were born, a fortune teller read your destinies. Between the two of you, one would be intelligent and become highly educated. The other would be useless, just waiting to die. So when I was born, she threw me into the filthy pigsty. Luckily, my grandfather heard my cries and found me, saving my life. Just a few vague words were enough to decide my fate. I asked back, so, did the fortune teller say which one of us was the better one? My mother confidently replied, "No, but you're crippled. How could you possibly succeed? It must be Dai Long." I laughed and told her, "All these years I've had an exceptional memory. All of Dai Long's homework was done by me. When he failed exams, I took them for him. Naturally, I did everything with my left hand." In her extreme shock, I cut the ropes tying her. "I've contacted your brother. Go back to your parents' house and never come back. Dai Long's death wasn't your fault. I knew you would secretly give him food. That night, I picked up the buns you threw in, but soon after, my father came in. I tried to explain calmly, but he couldn't bear to waste food. To turn the Empress Dowager into a guardian spirit for good fortune, a price must be paid. Dai Long was the first sacrifice." My eyes burned with determination as I stared at him. "The next one is you." When I was young, I asked my grandfather in disappointment, "What's the point of someone like me living?" My grandfather said he was born during wartime with constant famine. One moment everything could be fine, the next a bomb could blow half your body away. To him, just being alive was a blessing. "Nico, if you can't write with your right hand, use your left. Some people even write with their feet. As long as you're alive, just shamelessly live on. Don't worry about being useful or not." My grandfather affectionately patted my head. That was the first time I felt loved, without any sense of worthiness or unworthiness. The next day, my mother went back to her parents' house. This place where she had struggled for almost her entire life. How could she bear to leave? She committed suicide. Her red-clad body lay in the coffin next to my brother's, which had not yet been buried. Her blood kept flowing into my brother's body. The Taoist priest sighed. "Buried in the bottom of the coffin, she's about to become a vengeful ghost." My father's face twisted with hatred, angrily kicking the coffin to vent his frustration. Her blood and resentment had tainted the sacrifice. The goddess would not accept it. My father was very worried. He needed money desperately. A few days ago, I overheard Mrs. Ton persuading him to take over a factory. Lao Vung, my brother, managed to connect with the manager. "If we take over the fireworks factory, we will receive government support, securing our future." But that much money? My father wavered, but the priest had warned, the goddess needs to be worshipped, step by step. "Are you planning to hide in the gambling den for the rest of your life?" Mrs. Ton angrily rubbed her belly. "Do you want our son to be laughed at as the child of a gambling addict?" This statement provoked my father. He touched the talisman on his chest, making a ruthless decision. "All right, I'll take over the factory. You go make the deposit." I saw it clearly. The black smoke from the talisman had long corroded his entire body. It had touched his soul. That night was pitch black, the wind howling, dark clouds covering the moon. My father held an axe, creeping towards my bed. He mumbled an incantation, raising the axe high, its sharp light glinting. "Goddess above, please bless me with eternal fortune." But he only struck the air. In the bed was a pillow wrapped in a blanket. I leapt out from the shadows and subdued him. My father tried to resist, but he didn't know that I had long surpassed him in strength. I twisted his arms behind his back, pinned him down, and whispered in his ear, "Father, let me tell you a secret. The Empress Dowager's tomb is fake. Great-grandfather only told you that when the sixth core entered the tomb, the Empress Dowager's body was missing. But he didn't say that the elders at the time divided the army into 10 teams, each with puppets identical to the Empress Dowager to deceive the enemy. These puppets were made from living people. The luminous pearl in its mouth was refined from thousands of insects. You use the puppet to refine its soul. Yes, it can attract wealth. But you get one part, you pay 10 parts. The backlash has come. Can't you feel it? You bastard! You knew all along and said nothing to me." My father raged, cursing, but his body was weak, powerless. He could do nothing but turn red and beg. "Nico, I know I was wrong. Please forgive me. All the money will go to you in the future, right?" At this moment, Mrs. Ton came in with her big belly. My father shouted in joy, "Hini, save me!" The widow closed the door, walked over to me. "Nico, leave the rest to me." A flash of panic crossed my father's face. "You too." It turned out that Mrs. Ton's man, Mr. Trun, had worked in the mines with my father. Mr. Trun was diligent, saving up a few gold bars. My father, in debt from gambling and lusting after his wife, strangled him in the mine, taking the gold bars. The widow picked up the axe from the floor. The baby in my belly is Mr. Trun's. If it weren't for this child, I would have dragged you to hell with me. I stopped her. Killing would affect the child's future blessings. After all, karma had already arrived. Mrs. Ton used the factory to lure him. He wanted to get rich. The more wealth he desired, the more the goddess wanted in return. If he couldn't pay, she would cause trouble for him. The black smoke formed from resentment rose to the sky. My brother slowly crawled out, drooling, intestines dragging, pouncing on my father. My grandfather, mother, and Mr. Trun followed closely behind. Amidst the screams, I slammed the door shut. Looking up, the dark clouds had parted. The crescent moon appeared, curving gently. The moonlight tonight is beautiful, isn't it? I sent Mrs. Ton away, telling her never to return. Then, using my brother's identity, I applied to a high school in another district. Soon, I would become a high school student. On the day of my father's burial, the Taoist priest came, repeatedly lamenting. I responded, "What's there to lament? Didn't you recognize it was a puppet long ago and knew the outcome? A puppet, whoever refined it, would die." I didn't believe he didn't know. The old Taoist stroked his white beard, neither happy nor sad. Greed too great, what's the use of warning him? Did I tell him to kill? I warned him many times, everything has its limits, don't rush for success. Afterward, the old Taoist visited me a few times at school. He kindly brought various things for me and showed concern for my studies. I have a connection with the Vung family. My grandfather also served in the 6th Corps under Commander Ton. His gaze fell on the 8 trigram mirror on my chest. Your great-grandfather was the commander's confidant. Didn't he leave anything for your family? I replied nothing. If he had, my family wouldn't be like this. The old Taoist's tone became mysterious. That year, they raided the tomb and transported treasures for 3 days and nights without emptying it. Besides the military provisions, Commander Ton used these burial items to bribe high-ranking officials. However, the amount he dug up was just a drop in the ocean. After being captured, he never revealed the whereabouts of the remaining treasures. Little Vung, become my disciple, and I'll take you to find the Eastern Tomb treasure. I said that wasn't something a high school student should think about. It wasn't a refusal, nor a dead end. High school students shouldn't think about it, but it doesn't mean it's impossible in college. The Taoist admired me, saying, "Yes, education is most important now. Even Taoists like him must attend classes at the academy." After seeing him off, I seemed to return to those days. When we were still in the mountains, my grandfather gave me an 8 trigram mirror to ward off all evil. He also gave me a book and a piece of advice. Nico, Commander Ton divided the key to the Eastern Tomb treasure into 2 parts, entrusted to 2 confidants. Your great-grandfather was one of them, but the other, Lieutenant Trung, betrayed midway, trying to kill your great-grandfather to monopolize the treasure. Your great-grandfather escaped death, but feared bringing disaster upon himself. So, he chose to live a secluded life in this poor mountain village. He hid the treasure clue in the 8 trigram mirror. I didn't understand. Then why didn't grandfather ever think of finding the treasure? Grandfather smiled bitterly. Finding it could lead to death or maiming. One could say, knowing the treasure exists is happiness enough. As for how the Taoist knew about this, Trung Kung, 2 names sharing the character Kung. The vast sky at this moment, stars were shining together. I flipped a textbook page, couldn't help but laugh. How wonderful, I finally found it. This is my treasure.